Regulatory conversations is about improving the investment environment for both the regulator and those companies that are being regulated. We believe that Nigeria needs to improve on the investment climate. We believe Nigeria has been trying to improve in the investment climate, except those who are the players in that environment also give feedback to the government won't identify where there are still further opportunities to improve. Today we have spoken specifically about the addition of food and dairy products to the list of items that should not receive foreign exchange from the central bank. We reflected on the fact that 11 million children in Nigeria are stunted in their growth because of poor access to water, poor access to nutrition. The part of nutrition that is important for these children as well is the proteins. A lot of them get the proteins from milk, whether it's in the powder form and is mixed for them or otherwise. A lot of this comes both through water and sanitation and hygiene, and on the other side, access to the right nutrition. Our question is, has the government thought about the impact of this particular addition to that restriction list, what the impact will be on children aged 0 to 5 years old? Because most of the manufacturers are going to be forced to pass on any pressure, cost pressure they face to the consumer. And it means many of the consumers might have to cut it out of their diet entirely. Is this the result that the central bank was trying to achieve? We don't think so. We think that the central bank had a more noble intention, that it wanted to promote backward integration by the milk companies, which is a laudable effort, but it will take at least 5-10 years to get to the point where we are now manufacturing our own powdered milk in Nigeria. To set up a modest factory, you need about 1 million liters of milk a day collected. Right now, the company that is doing best with raw milk is collecting only 70,000 liters during the wet season, and in the dry season, it falls to below 20,000. Why is this? The cow needs 3 liters of milk, of water rather, to be able to produce 1 liter of milk. So the two go hand in hand. You can't ban importation without improving access to water for the cattle. You can't do that without improving access to good fodder to the cattle. There's so many structural things. Even if you had the milk, if you don't improve milk handling and milk hygiene, at the end of the day, the companies will still not offtake the milk. There are a lot of things that government is responsible for that have not even been touched. So we would like this conversation to encourage the government to think clearly about its philosophy of regulation and therefore improve the rigor that goes into research and analysis before arriving at specific policies that it's putting out. I'll leave it there for now.
And can I add?
Yes, sir.
In addition to what the CEO of CBI has said, this policy also has implications for the companies who are in the dairy sector. At this time, we are talking about employment, we are talking about investment, we are talking about revenue. We have very solid corporate organizations who are currently operating in the value chain of the dairy industry. This policy is going to put them all at a very great risk. We are talking about those who are into milk production, baby food, yogurt, some of these food and beverage industries. Quite a lot of them use a lot of milk. So if you have this policy to stay, it's going to put all these businesses at risk. And this has implications for employment because they're employing thousands of people. It has implications for government revenue because these are companies that are paying high taxes to government. So it has a whole lot of implications for all the companies operating in the value chain in the dairy industry. I'm making this point in addition to the point that was made by CBI CEO. Thank you.
Yes, I'd like to say. Okay. We have discussed this, and then one of the things that we mentioned was that for any institution to grow, you need the contribution of the relevant stakeholders. We believe that the federal government could have engaged the relevant stakeholders in formulating this policy to ensure that it's all to the benefit of the citizens. As ActionAid, partnering with the CBI, we work to eradicate poverty. And for us, the definition of poverty is to ensure that people have access to basic needs. So if they don't have access to food, to water, to health, to education, then that means you are further deepening poverty. Now, if the policy of the federal government has said, okay, we're going to remove the forex on food importation, what is the implication on people that are living in poverty and exclusion? How are they supposed to also, how is the policy going to affect them? And so we believe that one is to engage the relevant stakeholders. Two is to give ourselves enough time before we say the policy takes effect. How long is it going to take us to establish the dairy factory in Nigeria, and what are the conducive environments that we want to create? It's not going to happen overnight. It might take us 5 years, it might take us 7 years or 10 years. So we believe that in making this policy is not to make it effective immediately, but to give ourselves enough time to do our homework, to ensure that the environment is conducive for the factories, and to ensure that we have alternatives before we ban the importation of these items. Ultimately, we're looking at the bottom line is, how does it affect the people that are living in poverty and exclusion? And we also don't want to deepen poverty in the country, because we already know that we said majority of us are living below the poverty line. $2 a day is even going to worsen with this policy if we don't think it through. Thank you.
My name is Barnabas Associates. I work for Captain TV. I'm so disturbed about the issue of corruption that you said, about the regulators, prompting the private sector to, get involved in the corruption. Now, I think it would be more better if the organized private sector can, come up with suggestions as to how to deal with this situation effectively, rather than complain.
Okay, my name is Kelechuku Mboji. I write for Nigerian Tribune. I have a couple of questions. One, how long do you think, like how many years do you think government should have allowed before coming up with a program such as this? Two, but if CBN and government goes ahead to implement these policies, have you got an idea about the number of people, employees likely going to be affected, the number of companies operating in the food and dairy sector likely going to be affected, and the number of children also likely going to be further malnourished, and how many Nigerians are likely to fall deeper into poverty as a result of this policy? We expect from our own side as pressmen that the manufacturing sector, the private sector should have statistics such as this, so that when we are writing, we will be able to paint the devastating picture for government And I think that will be enough to move them to make a shift. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Tenny from TNT Media. So I apologize if you've already answered the question, but I want to know how we are bringing in the youth in this process. Like, since we've said the youth are the leaders of tomorrow, how are we, how do I put this word? How are we, like, bringing exactly into this whole process? Thank you.
One of the solutions that I would have loved the government to do is to engage the citizens, the civil societies, the private sector. This is a policy that affects all of us and cuts across. And together develop the plan, the work plan, for how to implement this policy. So for us right now, we feel that the government should go back to the drawing board and engage these stakeholders. And together we can say, this is the number of years it will take us. We have examples of countries that have done it in 5-6 years. So we need to also learn from those countries and say, how do we ensure that this policy, maybe when 2019, maybe 2023, 2024, we should be able to stop importation of dairy products. And within those 4 years or 5 years, we have a clear plan on how to start from year to year. The second thing about the youth integration is also creating employment for this youth in this value chain of the food production, which would also take them out of the unemployment brackets. We're talking about 33% of the population that is currently affected by poverty. So with this implementation, without thinking it through, we're likely to increase that number to 66% if we're not careful. So I think we need to go back to the drawing board, involve all the stakeholders, and together we create a think tank that would come up with the number of years it would take us, the process, and then the work plan. Thank you.
Okay, there are 3 things that have been asked. One question is about youth inclusion. One question is about statistics. One question is about time frame. Am I correct? Good.
No. He asked a question, he says, can we get solutions rather than the complaints, more solutions than complaints?
Okay, that's another question. So that's now 4. Good. Let's start from the statistics. I already told you 11 million children are stunted as a result of poor access to water, sanitation, and hygiene, and as a result of poor access to nutrition. So I don't know what new survey you want the private sector to do. That already is the NBS own statistics. You cannot get better than that. So let's even start from that. So you know that in the age group 0 to 5, that means 1 out of 3 children is stunted. The question is, can this lead to even worse effects? That is what the government should be checking before rolling out the policy. That's the point we're making there in terms of statistics. In terms of youth involvement, there is an opportunity for youth, even in the dairy sector, from the development of alternative fodders, which are better yielding. For example, if you feed your cow Napier grass instead of allowing it to roam, if you feed it Napier grass for just 2 weeks, milk production will jump up by 2 liters a day, single milking. Milking twice, it can even get to 2.5 or even 3. So we know that you can improve the amount of milk that you get out of the system. So the solution is to plant Napier grass. And in the National Livestock Transformation Plan, although it's not specifically mentioned, at least I haven't seen it there, there is opportunity for this kind of high-yielding grasses to be planted. Of course, you will get some jobs for youth who will be planting the grass. There's an opportunity to add value to the grass, because in the dry season, you still have the problem of feeding the cattle. So you can get pelletized grass. So people need to import machines. There's opportunity for investment. The youth can go into turning the pelletized grass into a product that can be shipped. So we can, and since the rainy season is longer in the south of Nigeria, you can plant throughout southern Nigeria and ship the pellets to the north, or ship silage in bags. Ship it to the north as well, made from this higher yielding grass. So that can be done. You can also improve extension by getting young people, unemployed graduates who have studied extension of various things, find a business model around them, so that with those business models, they're able to provide services to smallholder farmers in exchange for something that they can sell, or simply on behalf of distributing products on behalf of those who want to reach the smallholder farmer. Let me give you an example. You are a seed company and you're looking for how to distribute your products. If you have young people who have technology-enabled devices where they can link buyer with seller, you can better sell your seeds to the farmer. The same thing also, so there are solutions. The question is, are we thinking about those solutions? We've talked today about inclusive business models. Business models that take the poor as the consumer, the poor as your customer, the poor as your partner or as your employee. You integrate them into the value chain in ways that they can also improve their incomes and livelihood because of the economic activity that you are generating. So there are solutions. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. The question is that the direction of policy? That's not the direction of policy. Instead, the direction of policy is to ban certain things and restrict others from access to foreign exchange. So what we are asking government is to think carefully about the policy choices that they're making, because there are unintended consequences. And to some of us, those consequences are already glaring. If you go to the market, you will see that the prices of certain commodities have already started to increase. Even from the day it was announced, you found some products disappeared from the shelves. It's not that people bought them. People started speculating immediately that they know we won't be able to get it anymore. So how will we also survive? So we have to hoard some and release it gradually and get a higher price so we can also survive before we get our next supply. It's a system, and you can't expect that one policy will be treated by the public in isolation. It will affect everything else that you're doing. So all that we're calling on the government to do is to put a lot more rigor into the process of policy formulation and rollouts.
I don't have any.
I'm going to quickly, I took notes down because one is to compensate Festus for not taking your question when you raise your hand. But two is to offer me a chance to allow you to, from the same industry, to get the narratives correctly. Let me take your direct questions about solutions, that we should be coming for solutions for engaging, not complaints. I think that mindset of itself is a challenge, to look at what is happening as complaint. This is actually part of the process. So if you remember in the conversation we were talking about, it is a process, not an event. And Frank mentioned something. He said it is important to focus on getting the actual people involved in the whole job, involved at that stage, before you make the policy and then get them to react. So what you see is the reaction. This reaction is better captured by terminology called the Cobra effect. That means, you can read about the summary of it is the intersection between economics and politics often allows a particular intervention to move away from the intention and go towards unintended consequences because it hasn't been fully thought through. So this whole idea is that you have the chambers here, you have manufacturing association, you have the players themselves who organize themselves in that make industry, like Bumi Oke was referring to. These would have been people who would have understood that we have institutional memory on how we've done it before. When we want to move industry, we say, and we give an example of cement. We tell them where the goal is. Then we give that gap. You know why that gap is necessary? One, impact assessment would have been in place before the policy, so they know how to. They will know how to measure that impact, all those things. Also, allow them for capital formation. Those who will raise funds. It also allows for a transition. And the transition is not just for the company, it's transition in regulation as well. Because most of the times, people change, the regulator does not change. The regulator still uses the old approach to do it. So that thing allows you. And I'll give you an example, telecoms. Once we made those changes, people were still working within the NITEL mindset. It took a while for the regulator, because also the regulator needs a learning curve. The consumers need a learning curve. And in order just to manage the volatility in the market, you then say, as we're introducing this, we are doing it. For those of you who run businesses, we usually use a term we call pilot running, whereby you are running the two systems simultaneously. It has always worked in this country. I'm not telling you about what worked in America or whatever, in Nigeria. That goes to it that if the intentions were truly to do the noble thing, and by the way, they can be mutually exclusive. Self-sufficiency and FX, it doesn't one does not mean the other. But if the intention is that they want to promote self-sufficiency, and at the same time, the keyword, and at the same time, conserve FX, and this is the plan to move, then they will give that time. The reason why the time is not there is because their need is immediate. Their needs right now is immediate. They just need to stop that thing. So the real solution is that nobody's against the policy. What we are against is that the whole thing does not make sense, because what you've just done, and this is why I see the link for the business action against corruption, is that this regulatory overdrive, what you may call regulatory overreach, or better still, to use my typical language, regulative exuberance. What it does is that it therefore creates the condition for corruption. In fact, it establishes it because it has created a distortion in the market systems and an unusual arbitrage, whereby it creates either you find access to certain persons or not. Amuda made a very striking point, which I think you as journalists must say. It is one thing for the central bank to say, I have not banned importation of milk. I have only restricted it. That is a fact. In reality, the banks, understanding that they do not want to go against what you call the signaling by the regulator, would not process your Form M. And therefore, you have technically, therefore, been banned from doing it. And so it's important for those of you who help us understand to separate that language very clearly. And so, to your questions, all you've been hearing are the solutions that we can. And we cannot just even restrict it to milk alone. Oh, by the way, every time you write, sorry, and this is me, and you talk about cow, milk, no, use the correct terminology. It is a dairy ecosystem. From that single cow, there are about 45 derivatives from it. Maybe if you want to break it down to understand. In those 45, there is a whole ecosystem on itself that can create multiple jobs and what have you. So when you talk about cow, you reduce it to that man pushing that funny-looking contraption around, and that's where this argument gets lost. It's far much more bigger than that. So I'm sorry, I've turned into a lecture.
Yeah, I think what we must also address, as you correctly said, is that this is not against the central bank. No. This is instead a call to the central bank that we really know what the problem is. The problem is not milk. The problem is not food. The problem is Forex. We finished the money, Abi. Just tell us. So let's sit down together and find out how we will all manage it together. Don't form for us that it is about milk when we can see with our eyes that it's not about milk. Don't tell us it's about food. It's not. You've run out. So let's sit down together and work out how we will survive. It's not just your country, it's our country as well. We're all together in the problem. So let's work out a solution together. That's the purpose of what we're doing here today. Not carrying a placard against CBN. That's not the purpose of today. The purpose of today is to remind CBN that you may have been thinking of the business side, but there are people that you didn't intend to hurt, that you are hurting through this your policy. So stop. Let's sit down and package it again and see what are you trying to do. Achieve 40% reduction in Forex spending, or is it 60%? Let's sit down and work out where should the allocations be, where should the priorities be, where will we get the least damage to people for reducing that appetite for Forex. You understand what we're trying to say? That is the conversation we should be having. Okay.
I want to suggest this thing out, that is it not good, since the central bank have taken ahead to commit their action, it's not good for you to organize through either man or LCCI to write a letter to CBN to sit down on the same table and discuss it, rather than go to a page of paper. Because what you say is now, perhaps tomorrow or next tomorrow you'll be seen on the paper and CBN will begin run up and down to react to your own. That is technically become a media war. For me, I would advise you, based on your last statement now, that yes, it's right. Let CBN look at this thing, look at this, so that people can sit down and iron it out. That is my word. But since you have seen it, it's correct.
Okay.
My name is Benjamin Ame.
Okay.
My platform is, I publish Ame online.
Okay. Just to mention again that they were all invited. The governor was invited. The desk officer for trade and Forex was invited. All the relevant people were invited. However, I think I'll let Mr. Muda comment on whether or not a letter is needed and further engagement. But this is just the start, and the intention is to engage.
Yes. I imagine that there will be a communique from this. Yes. And this communique will be shared among all the key stakeholders, including the CBN, the presidency, and all of them. So I think that will communicate the outcome of this. Thank you.
And by the way, since you asked a very important question, you make a very important observation, and now you must complete that task by doing the third leg. You must therefore write importantly to avoid that which you envisage. It is how you write that changes the whole thing. The critical thing in what you said is that responsibility is actually yours. You've listened to us very clear, it's documented, it's clear. There's really nothing. See, if I may say so, I do not believe that the central bank is averse to criticism. I do not believe they are also an institution that does not support a review of their practices. What I think is clear here is that when you take an action and you inform people later, even in your house, you take an action concerning your family members will react to it. What you see is a responsible engagement. That's why it's called conversations. Not a protest. It's a conversation that this conversation has. And I think we got it very clearly by saying, let us strip it of every pretense about it. We are dealing with an FX problem. This problem was there before, but when we still had money, we didn't face it. Sometimes problems allows you to confront the most difficult questions that you've avoided. If any of you should go through personal financial challenges, you will make some different choices. And those things you've ignored before, you will confront them. And that's what Nigeria is facing. And this, I wanted to use coalition, coming together of people, represents a critical component of that process, whereby everybody is coming as a body and saying, let us engage, let us go forward and find a better way. And I think I will particularly be looking out for what you write. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Final question.
Okay, thank you. My name is Dume Festus. I work with Financial Edge. My name is Dume Festus. I work with Financial Edge. I think, first of all, I want to start by thanking you people for organizing this event, because it shows some level of patriotism. If not, you won't be embarking on this kind of project. The first thing I want to ask Mr. Asoji is that, besides writing the regulator like CBN, in this case of FX, have you people tried to maybe engage them on a personal level as a group? One. Yes. And then the other question I want to ask Mr. Muda, because I understand Mr. Femi's position as reality. It's not that we are attacking CBN, but let's do things right, because this is more or less a social change, social problem. How do we handle it? Mr. Muda, is this not an indictment on trade groups, business trade groups in the country, when we talk about backward integration? Because you have research departments that's supposed to be futuristic, vis-a-vis maybe when government releases budget or policies, where would this thing end up? Or maybe when politicians are making campaign, that this is where their administrative policy will move into. That for people in your group would have think that's okay, let us start something like backward integration, which we are not even seeing. And I think it's an indictment on our trade group that when issues come up suddenly like that, they are caught napping. And the next thing we start is a panicking situation. My other question is for Action Aid. I think Action Aid has been long in this country for some time. I remember those days when we were in secondary school. In fact, they have it as a club in secondary schools in those days. And so if we are talking about the engagement, like the dairy issue, talk about milk now, is it possible for Action Aid to intensify their engagement in Nigeria the way they used to do it in those days? Because we used to have something like debate, discuss policy issues, even at that level at public schools. And I don't think Action Aid is engaging in that kind of move again. I thank you for involving in this kind of project, but I think there's much to be done, which I think we can also see talk on a one-on-one basis in that regard. Thank you.
Yes, you talked about what the trade groups or chambers of commerce are doing to promote backward integration. Quite a lot is happening. During the discourse, somebody talked about cement. The kind of local production we have today, we didn't have it 10 years ago. We have got to a point now where we are practically self-sufficient in cement. We used to import a great deal. Then if you look at the food and beverage sector, there's a whole lot of backward integration taking place. It's actually one of our biggest strengths as an economy. And if you look at even the performance on the stock exchange, the food and beverage sector are the most consistent and the most valuable. One of the most valuable on the stock exchange. And they are achieving that feat because of backward integration. So a whole lot is happening. The Nigerian breweries, for instance, or the brewery sector, they use a lot of local maize as we speak, quite a lot. They have suppliers from the north who bring maize down to the south. So it's also in the enlightened self-interest of even the corporate organization, the manufacturers, to source their raw materials locally. And they are trying their best to do so. But you see, it is easier in some sectors than in others. Some need a lot of time and all of that. That is why we're engaging in this conversation. Just as we said earlier, the objective is noble, but the strategy of transition is what we need to get right. Thank you.
Thank you for your observation about Action Aid engagement. There is a saying that says if the rate of change outside exceeds the one inside, then that organization is going into extinct. We used to have a lot of national level engagement and forgetting the people that are at the community level, the grassroots level. And that was why we changed our strategy a little bit to go to the grassroots, the community level, engage them. We use an approach that is called human rights-based approach. Instead of allowing organizations or political parties to come and hand down things to you, how do we empower those people at the grassroots level to also have the capacity to engage the people and say, no, you think it's water I need, whereas it is health center, because a lot of people are dying in the community. So we're engaging at the grassroots level, at the community level, at the local government level, to ensure that when the politicians come and make some promises, you can actually say no. Don't buy my vote. These are the needs in this community. So that's why you have not seen a lot of the national level engagement, because we don't want to stay at the peripheral and be speaking grammar to you and I. Whereas the people that matters, where the majority are, don't even have an idea of what is going on within the national, within the Nigeria or the nation. So that's where the strategy changed a little bit. But we can also, we'll still complement it with the national engagement and ensure that everybody is empowered, they have an understanding of what the issues are and how they can respond to it. Thank you.
Well, just to say thank you very much for coming. We're very grateful for your staying behind after for this segment as well. We're very grateful. And we will continue to partner with you to make Nigeria greater. Thank you.